Hey everyone! Tonight we begin with something quiet and slow and just a little strange in the softest possible way. So take a deep breath, dim the lights, pull the blanket a little higher over your shoulders. Welcome to this sleepy tale about a kingdom that existed a long time ago and far, far away. A kingdom where every autumn the sky would quietly crumble and send pieces of stars down into the forests, the riverbanks, and even onto the rooftops. I know. Totally efficient cosmic delivery system. Amazon Prime, but celestial. Anyway, this isn't really a story about what the stars were made of, or how they fell, or whether gravity cared enough to be involved. It's more about the people who lived there, their lives, their romances, their absurd little political arguments, the quiet tragedies hidden between royal dinners and early morning mist, and of course, magic, the gentle kind, the soft kind, the kind that doesn't require explosions or dragons screaming from the background, more like the kind that feels like autumn air, or the sound of rain against old windows. So let's float into the kingdom of Caelomere. Nobody knew exactly when Caelomere began. Old manuscripts mentioned it vaguely, the way historians today talk about medieval plumbing. Very reluctantly. Some said it was founded by shepherds. Others claimed it was born from a meteor shower. You know, standard kingdom origin story options. But one thing everyone could agree on was this. Every fall, just after the first cold wind brushed through the valley, the stars fell. Not in violent streaks, not like meteors threatening to destroy the crops. They fell slowly, quietly, like autumn leaves made from light. Now the king of Caelomere at this particular point in history was King Aldric IV. And yes, the Ivul was absolutely unnecessary. The first three Aldrics were barely functional humans, and the fourth wasn't much better. He had the royal Habsburg-style jawline, as in, it looked slightly confused about which direction it wanted to exist. But Aldric had one thing going for him. He believed the falling stars were romantic. Which brings us neatly to the first character of our sleepy history saga, Lady Orhelin. She wasn't a noble-born princess, no dramatic royal lineage, no enchanted origin story. She was simply the daughter of the royal librarian. The library of Caelomere sat at the edge of a forest, much too close to where the stars fell, which was incredibly impractical from an architectural standpoint. Imagine rebuilding your roof every year because the sky decided it wanted to redecorate. But Lady Orhelin grew up among books that smelled like old ink and pressed leaves. She knew every history the kingdom had written. Actually, she knew too much history, which is why nobles avoided her like she carried disease. After all, she had facts, a terrifying concept in royal courts. Every autumn she would collect the fallen stars. Before dawn, they cooled into crystalline stones, tiny, faintly glowing pieces of the sky. She kept them in jars in her window, where their light shimmered like something the moon forgot to take home. King Aldric, being the romantic idiot he was, believed the stars were messages from the heavens. He had this idea that every crystal held a prophecy, which was great for his ego, because if the universe wrote prophecies just for him, obviously he must be important. Now we shift slowly, like turning a page, to the next piece of this kingdom, Prince Lucien. Lucien was the younger brother of Aldric, and he was everything Aldric was not. quiet, thoughtful. Not obsessed with celestial approval. He didn't believe in prophecies. He believed in libraries, especially the one Lady Aureline lived in, more than she actually lived in the castle. Lucian once described the falling stars like this. They look like autumn rain pretending to be light. See? Totally a poetic, gentle heart. Also terrible at military matters. He once tried to ride a horse into battle and got distracted by the clouds, which is very on brand for this kingdom. The people of Calamar called him the Prince of Late Morning, not because he overslept, but because he had this aura, like he always existed just after sunrise. Calm, slightly melancholic, and wrapped in golden light. But here's where the dreamy story gets a little historical. Just a little. Gently. There was a prophecy. It said, "When the last star falls, the kingdom shall lose its crown." Chilling, but not dramatic. It was more like a gentle warning. Something your grandmother would say before closing the shutters for the night. King Aldrich believed the prophecy referred to him. Obviously, because humility was not a trait handed down through the royal bloodline. If anything, the family inherited dramatic overconfidence through generations of careful inbreeding. Classic royal tradition. Prince Lucien, however, believed something different. The prophecy wasn't about royalty at all. It was about the land, the people, the quiet things kingdoms forget. And right between these two very different interpretations stood Lady Aureline, collecting star fragments, reading ancient texts, keeping her quiet knowledge tucked between the pages of history. For years, the three existed in a strange constellation. Aldrich seeking purpose in the stars, Lucien finding solace in the library, Aureline walking between their worlds like an autumn wind. There was no love triangle, no jealousy, no loud arguments. That's too stressful for bedtime. Instead, there was quiet companionship. They were bound together by curiosity, not drama. But all things change when a kingdom forgets how to listen to itself. Because one autumn, only one star fell. Just one. And suddenly the prophecy didn't seem so poetic anymore. The stars that refused to obey. Still awake? That's fine. We're not in a hurry. The kingdom isn't going anywhere. Reality isn't either, unfortunately. So, where were we? Right. The kingdom where the stars fell like snowflakes nobody asked for. A place where even the night skies seemed to be running late and slightly dramatic. Honestly, kind of relatable. Now this is where things begin to shift. Slowly, gently, like autumn leaves drifting off a tree that gave up on resisting gravity. The stars didn't just fall anymore. They began falling closer. Some people in the kingdom swore they could hear whispers from the heavens. Little dreamlike rumors passed around in the quiet cafes and candlelit halls. The stars are listening. Which is exactly the kind of mysterious statement that gets scribbled into journals and never properly explained. The king, meanwhile, became even more invested in what everyone politely called his celestial hobby, and what everyone privately called a full-blown obsession. He had the castle astronomers consult their charts. He had the mathematicians calculate the angle of descent. He even asked the royal poets for their opinion, because nothing says, "I'm spiraling emotionally," quite like asking a poet for scientific advice. The king didn't sleep anymore. He spent his nights standing on the highest balcony of the palace. Long velvet coat, cold breeze, autumn moonlight, all of it. Very dramatic, very aesthetic. and every night he would whisper into the sky, "Why are you falling?" As if the stars would suddenly answer back. The Queen tried to help, but her approach was more emotionally practical. She would put a blanket around his shoulders and say things like, "Please come inside. You'll catch a cold." Which, to be fair, is a reasonable concern. Royalty may have survived assassinations, civil wars, arranged marriages, and questionable fashion choices throughout history. But the common cold has always been the silent victor. Yet the king refused. He stood there night after night, waiting for something to change. And then, something did. One autumn evening, a star didn't fall like the others. It descended slowly, almost deliberately. It hovered above the castle, glowing like a lantern guiding a tired traveller home. And everyone in the kingdom saw it. The bakers, the soldiers, the children, the nobles, the ones who pretended not to care but absolutely did. For the first time, the king didn't beg it for answers. He just watched. And the star, with a light gentle as breath, drifted down into the courtyard below. No explosion, no divine thunder, no angels descending with trumpets and dramatic soundtrack. It just landed softly, like it belonged there. People gathered around slowly, cautiously, whispering like the world had suddenly become fragile. Is this a sign? A warning? Magic? Or the most common reaction? So, now what? Nobody knew, except for one person. The Queen stepped forward, calm, steady, slightly annoyed that a celestial event had disrupted dinner plans. In that quiet, steady voice queens always seem to have, she said, "It's not falling, it's coming home." That was the moment something shifted in the kingdom. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a subtle shift in the air, as if the whole world took a breath. The star pulsed once, a slow, soft heartbeat of light. And then someone noticed something more alarming. It was changing shape, very gradually, very quietly, not into fire, not into stone, but into something unmistakably human. Let's float slowly into the next moment, because nothing in this kingdom ever happens all at once. Even the stars seem to prefer taking their time. The kingdom where stars fall down. So you've probably guessed by now that this kingdom wasn't one of those chaotic empires that like to set things on fire just to check if it still worked afterwards. No, this place ran on something much more dramatic and much more impractical: tradition. Because of course it did. The castle itself was guarded by enormous stone lions that looked like they were trying very hard not to yawn. They had been sculpted during what historians later called the era of excess marble, which was essentially a 100-year period where royal architects were absolutely drunk on the concept of decorative stone. Columns? Yes. Decorative fountains? Absolutely. A giant stone staircase that led nowhere. Why not? If you have the marble, you use the marble. Inside that castle lived a queen who seemed to embody autumn itself. Her name was Seraphine, which already should tell you she was born into a world that expected her to do dramatic things. She wore long, rust-colored gowns that looked like falling leaves stitched into fabric. Her hair was the exact shade of burnt maple. And yes, the poets never stopped mentioning that, even when nobody asked. She had a way of speaking that sounded like candlelight, soft, warm, inviting. But there was a strange sort of quiet in her voice too, the kind that comes from knowing too much and saying too little. She was the kind of queen who looked at the horizon like she remembered someone who never came back from it. Her husband, King Aurelius, was famous for a different reason. Not because he was wise or brave or frighteningly competent like kings were supposed to be. No, he was famous for collecting clocks, thousands of them, which is honestly a red flag. He had clocks in his bedroom, clocks in his office, clocks in the dining hall, clocks in the garden, which made absolutely no sense. And so many clocks in the throne room that foreign ambassadors sometimes had to wait until the chimes finished screaming before they could announce anything important. And when courtiers asked what it meant, Aurelius always gave the same mysterious answer: "Time listens here," whatever that meant. Now, here's the part. History likes to glide past politely. Aurelius didn't actually want power. He wanted to understand time, mostly because he believed it was broken. Some called it philosophy. Others called it an obsession. One scholar simply called it deeply inconvenient for everyone involved. But the truth was simpler. Aurelius was terrified of endings. Every fall without fail, he would go out to the palace gardens and watch the leaves turn gold. He never missed it. He believed the kingdom of falling stars had been chosen by nature, because this was the one place where things didn't die. They simply transformed. That idea was the beginning of a very expensive royal project. He hired astronomers, inventors, scholars, and a suspiciously large number of alchemists, who all promised they definitely weren't doing anything illegal. They studied the stars. They charted constellations. They recorded meteor showers. They built enormous brass machines that clicked and whirred and looked like they belonged in the kind of scientific laboratory where dramatic accidents happen. Even though this is a bedtime story, let's skip the explosions. We're staying calm. But here's the thing. Every autumn, without warning, a single star fell down from the sky into the kingdom. The people treated it like a festival. The queen treated it like a memory, and Aurelius treated it like a warning. Why did the stars fall only here? Why did time feel different only here? Why did the leaves never seem to rot? People whispered that the kingdom was protected by an ancient spell. Others swore the stars were messages, prophecies, invitations. Accounts vary depending on which historian was trying to get published, but the overall vibe is something magical was watching this place. And then, quietly, without the fanfare of a prophecy or the drama of a royal decree, everything started to change when someone new arrived at the palace. A girl named Mira. But before we meet her, let's slow down. Let's breathe. Let the story stretch into the soft edges of autumn again. We have time. After all, in this kingdom, time listens. The autumn of lanterns and unfinished hearts. Hey again. Let's gently settle in. If you're already sinking deeper into your pillow and staring into the void like it owes you an explanation, perfect. That's exactly the vibe this story requires. So, where were we? Ah, yes. The kingdom where stars fall down was slowly rolling into autumn. That kind of autumn where the wind smells like cold apples and stories nobody asked for. The kind that makes leaves fall like someone upstairs keeps deleting files from the universe. And of course, the kingdom reacted in the most royal way possible, by pretending everything was normal and hosting a festival. Because when your nation's sky occasionally drops flaming celestial objects, and your monarchy is barely holding the family tree together, why not cover everything with lanterns and call it culture? It was called the Festival of the Unmended Wishes. Very dramatic, very poetic, the kind of name someone definitely invented during an emotional midnight spiral. It began during the reign of Queen Aurelia, who, as we discussed before, refused to accept that stars falling from the sky were a sign of cosmic malfunction, and instead declared it romance. And to be fair, this is the same woman who would later convince an entire palace staff that errors in the royal calendar were actually aesthetic choices. So, of course, she turned falling stars into a yearly festival. Autumn in this kingdom was stunning in an almost unfair way. Villages tucked between mountains and silver streams. Maple trees that changed colors so dramatically that they rivaled royal scandals. Couples would go out for midnight walks, holding hands and whispering like the entire world was written in cursive. And the palace. Oh, the palace. It was covered in lanterns made of moon-white glass. Some were shaped like constellations, others like mythical beasts. The lanterns weren't just decorations. They symbolized making peace with the sky, which is very philosophical until you remember it was also a tourism campaign. Inside the palace courtyard, servants rushed around arranging silken pillows and tea stations. It smelled like dried roses and citrus and that kind of historical wealth where nobody knows where the money comes from, just that it does. Prince Calum, as usual, was avoiding important responsibilities. I like to imagine him leaning against a pillar with his coat unbuttoned in an intentionally casual way. The kind that says, yes, I'm technically royalty, but I also read poetry at 3 a.m. and have inconvenient feelings. He was holding a star fragment in his hand, still warm, still glowing. Everyone else treated these fragments like holy relics. He treated them like unanswered text messages from the universe. And the star didn't just glow. It pulsed, softly, like a heartbeat. No one else noticed. Not his attendants, not the guards, not even the astronomers who had essentially devoted their lives to star-falling research, or lack thereof. And as Calum stared at that star fragment, he felt something he didn't have a word for yet. Not destiny, not danger, not romance. More like that emotion you get while standing at a window during rain. You don't want answers. You just want to keep staring. All around him, the palace was preparing. Musicians tuned their instruments. Servants set out cinnamon pastries and crystal decanters filled with moon-infused wine. Because of course the kingdom made moon wine. Rich people always turn natural disasters into luxury beverages. And the queen, ever the strategist, watched quietly from a balcony. She looked serene, but beneath all that velvet and authority was the subtle paranoia of a woman who knew her kingdom was built on unanswered questions. Stars didn't fall for no reason, especially not in a kingdom with a suspiciously elegant mythology. But instead of addressing the cosmic mystery head-on, she turned toward her trusted advisor, Chancellor Virens. If you've ever met someone who has too many opinions and not enough hobbies, you understand him immediately. He always wore autumn-colored robes, which made him resemble a walking pile of expensive leaves. He spoke softly, always softly, because powerful men often learn to whisper before they learn to shout. "My queen," he said. "The festival begins at moonrise." Aurelia nodded. "And the stars?" Virens smiled with that annoyingly calm expression people use when they definitely know something they shouldn't. "Tonight," he said simply, "they fall." And he walked away before she could ask more. Classic advisor behavior. Say a cryptic line, then vanish like a Netflix cliffhanger. Meanwhile, Prince Calum was still arguing privately with the universe, and that's when she arrived. The girl from the library, the one who kept showing up in symbolic places as if she were purposely ignoring the rules of plot convenience. Ilara. Not royalty, not noble, not even technically invited to this palace event. And yet, there she was, walking across the courtyard as if the palace belonged to her dreams. Her dress was simple, midnight blue, the kind of blue that made you think of an ocean under starlight. Autumn leaves fell around her, sticking to her hair like the season itself wanted to follow her around. She spotted Calum and approached him without hesitation. Everyone else bowed, curtsied, or panicked when approaching a prince. Ilara simply stepped forward and said, "You're holding it wrong." Because apparently social etiquette was optional. Calum blinked. "It's just a star." "No," Ilara said, "it's a message. And here's the thing." She said it in a way that made Calum believe her, not because she proved anything, but because some people carry truth like perfume. You can smell it even if they never speak a word. Calum handed her the glowing fragment, and the moment their fingers brushed, the star pulsed brighter. I know. Dramatic. If the palace had electricity, every light would have flickered. Summer memories melted into autumn crispness, and the lanterns above them swayed gently in the wind. "You know why they fall," she said. "No," Calum replied, "but you want to." And as their voices lowered, the first star of the night streaked across the sky. Slow, gentle, soft enough to watch without fear. The whole courtyard paused. Musicians, servants, nobles. It was the kind of moment people tell their grandchildren about. The moment when something ancient stirred. The lanterns glowed brighter. The star fell. And the kingdom's story deepened into mystery. We'll glide into the next thread of tangled royal destiny in a moment. But let's stay here, just for one more breath. In the courtyard, in the lantern light, in the soft autumn air. It feels like the world is waiting. The kingdom where stars fall down. So let's drift a little deeper into the kingdom's memory. The kind of memory that feels soft at the edges, like an old photograph losing its contrast. The kingdom of Celoria had always been obsessed with the sky, not in a normal poetic way, but in the kind that becomes a national personality trait. People in this place didn't just look up and admire stars. They believed stars were messages. And if that doesn't scream medieval astrology gone wild, then I don't know what does. Every family had their own little superstition. Someone's grandmother would swear she once saw a star fall directly over her house, meaning she was destined to marry a knight. She actually married a baker, but that's medieval expectations versus reality for you. The palace, however, took everything up a level. They built towers just for looking at the heavens. Not astronomic towers, not scientific towers. No, they were more like luxury observation decks for wishing really hard. And up there, in the highest one, lived the strange prince of the kingdom, Elion. Now Elion was, how do I put this politely? He was that person who looks like the concept of autumn got turned into a human. Soft brown hair, eyes that looked like maple syrup, a vibe of, I just read a very dramatic novel about love and destiny. He spent his nights staring at the sky. He spent his days sleeping until noon. You know, like every great historical prince ever. But here's the thing. Elion wasn't known for his leadership. He wasn't known for strength, or diplomacy, or anything remotely king-like. He was known for one ridiculous legend. They said he could talk to the stars. Of course he could, Because why not double down on celestial weirdness? People whispered about him in the streets. Shopkeepers, stable boys, bakers, even the noble ladies who had zero actual political power, but a maximum gossip quota. Some claimed Elian was blessed, some claimed he was cursed, and one stubborn archivist insisted he was just very sleep-deprived, which honestly might be the most realistic explanation. But one autumn night, when the kingdom was quiet, something changed. The first star fell. It didn't streak across the sky like a dramatic meteor shower. It didn't blaze or roar or crash. It simply drifted downward, slowly, softly, like a snowflake made of light. And Elian, being Elian, walked outside barefoot in the freezing air to pick it up. Because of course he did. Romance beats practicality every time. He held it in his palm, a star no bigger than a teacup, glowing softly, pulsing, warm. It spoke, not in words, not in a voice, but in a feeling, a whisper in the heart, a message that didn't need language. The kingdom is changing. The star dissolved into light and vanished into his chest. And just like that, Elion became the first person in recorded or unrecorded history to actually absorb cosmic decor into his soul. Which sounds dramatic, but wasn't. He didn't faint. He didn't become immortal. He didn't suddenly get a six-pack and a magical sword. No, he just felt different, calmer, more awake, like the world was shifting into focus for the first time. Let's float forward a little, because of course the next morning the palace freaked out. Servants were whispering, nobles were panicking, advisors were trying to have extremely serious meetings about meteorology, even though none of them knew what meteorology was. And the king, Elion's father, was doing what every medieval king does when faced with something mildly unusual. He demanded a prophecy. Because if something weird was happening, obviously the solution was to ask an old woman in a cloak who lived in a tower, surrounded by candles, crystals, and questionable herbal tea. Her name was Mirren. Nobody ever called her a sorceress or astrologer or prophetess, just Mirren. Mirren got summoned to the throne room. She looked tired. She always looked tired, probably from decades of dealing with royalty. The king demanded answers. She didn't sugarcoat anything. The stars are falling because this kingdom has forgotten its story. Now that is the most vague mystical prophecy ever made. But the king took it seriously, because kings love vague mystical prophecies. They're like cosmic customer service warnings. And then she added, "Your son is going to be the one who decides what comes next." Silence. Nobody breathed. Even the enormous royal dog looked confused. Because everyone knew the king's son wasn't exactly born to lead. He was born to brood dramatically on balconies at sunset. And yet, Mirren was certain. She even leaned forward with this little autumn quiet voice and said, "The stars are coming home. Let's drift onward again." From that moment, every night more stars fell. Not destruction, not chaos, just gentle light. And the people of Siluria did something humans rarely do in history. They adapted. They walked out into the cool, amber-toned evenings and picked up the fallen stars like children collecting fireflies. They placed them in lanterns. They set them on windowsills. They lit the kingdom with shining fragments of the sky. The entire kingdom glowed more beautifully than it ever had before. But not everything was peaceful, because the falling stars awakened something else, something sleeping, something old, and something that remembered the kingdom, not as it was, but as it used to be. As the amber light of autumn draped itself over the kingdom, the people moved slowly through streets, lined with cobblestones that gleamed faintly in the soft glow of lanterns. It was a calm evening, the kind that makes you want to sit by the window with a warm drink and listen to the wind whisper secrets through the branches of nearly bare trees. And speaking of secrets, the kingdom had plenty. You see, magic wasn't just a story told to children here. It was woven into the very fabric of the streets, the markets, and even the old moss-covered castle towers. Let's float over to one of these towers, where the king, a man both adored and misunderstood, sat hunched over a collection of parchment. He had a habit of writing letters he never intended to send. Long, rambling thoughts about the stars, the clouds, and how he thought the autumn leaves might be trying to tell him something. Of course, he was considered eccentric, though in a gentle sort of way. People whispered that his mother, a mysterious figure with a fondness for midnight walks, had passed on more than just his dark eyes. She had given him the curiosity that made him see the world not as it was, but as it could be. Across the kingdom, the markets were settling into evening quiet. Lanterns swayed slightly in the breeze, casting playful shadows over piles of spices and the occasional wandering cat. Magic lingered in small ways here. The baker's bread seemed to rise a little higher than it should, and if you were very quiet, you could swear the wind hummed along with the music of unseen flutes. Children had already been tucked into beds, dreaming of dragons and distant lands, their dreams stitched with the same subtle enchantment that made the kingdom breathe and shimmer even as night fell. In the royal gardens, a young apprentice moved carefully among the statues. He was learning the old ways of the kingdom, how to listen to the trees, how to coax words from the stone faces of forgotten heroes, and perhaps how to notice the stars before they fell. Magic in this kingdom was patient, subtle, like a whisper in the hair of someone sleeping. And the apprentice, for all his clumsiness and shy smiles, was beginning to understand that sometimes the stars that fell were not lost. They simply wanted to be found. And while our apprentice marveled at statues and studied shadows, elsewhere, the autumn wind carried a rumor of something peculiar, something that would touch every corner of the kingdom, from the quietest alley to the grandest hall. But tonight, the rumor was just a ripple in the cool air, unnoticed by most. Sleepy townsfolk carried on their gentle routines. The candlelight flickered, a dog snored softly by the hearth, and the distant chime of the castle bell marked another hour in the kingdom's slow, magical rhythm. It was in these quiet, undisturbed hours that the real stories of the kingdom whispered themselves into being. Not the stories of grand battles or fierce dragons, though they existed somewhere in the past, tucked neatly into dusty tomes, but the stories of small, peculiar moments that shimmered like tiny stars. The way an old librarian nodded off with her spectacles askew, the way a stray cat seemed to understand secrets better than anyone, the way even the autumn leaves fell as if performing a slow, deliberate dance for anyone patient enough to watch. And so, the kingdom slept, bathed in the amber glow of lamps and the soft sigh of autumn winds, while the stars, falling or otherwise, kept their silent, watchful vigil over dreams yet to come. As dawn lingered lazily on the horizon, painting the sky in soft peaches and muted golds, the kingdom stirred, not with noise, but with a gentle, stretching kind of movement, like a cat waking from a dream. Even the air seemed to yawn. The streets were empty at first, save for a few early risers who moved with deliberate slowness, careful not to disturb the quiet magic that hung over the town like a soft blanket. In the heart of the castle, the king's study glimmered faintly with the reflected morning light. He sat at a desk cluttered with ink pots, scrolls, and a small brass telescope aimed toward the heavens. The stars that had fallen last night, or so the rumors said, were already fading in the dawn, leaving a faint shimmer in the minds of those who had glimpsed them. Of course, the king had tried to record their descent, sketching them in a notebook filled with doodles, numbers, and sideways comments like, "Probably just a trick of the wind, or maybe magic. Who knows?" Elsewhere, the apprentice wandered through the gardens again, this time noticing the dew on the autumn leaves. Each drop caught the morning light and reflected it like tiny, fleeting stars. He had begun to understand something vital. Magic in this kingdom was not always grand or explosive. Often, it was in the tiny, overlooked moments, the quiet rhythms of life, the subtle nods between the wind and the branches. The baker, too, had started his day, kneading dough while humming softly, unconsciously weaving a bit of enchantment into each loaf. The smell of fresh bread wove through the streets, mingling with the crisp autumn air, and somehow it seemed to make people slower, gentler, as though they too were caught in the kingdom's lullaby. Meanwhile, in the outskirts of town, an old astronomer adjusted her telescope. She had watched the sky every night for decades, but this morning was different. The fallen stars had left faint trails, like footprints across the heavens, hinting at stories that were not yet finished. She scribbled notes in her journal, careful to keep her hand steady, despite a yawn that threatened to spill ink across the page. Her eyes, tired yet bright, reflected the same calm fascination that had kept the kingdom afloat on the edges of reality and dream. Magic, romance, and autumn, the three companions of the kingdom, continued their quiet dance. Lovers whispered to one another on hidden benches beneath turning leaves. Children chased shadows cast by the golden sun. And everywhere, the trees seemed to lean in a little closer to hear the soft secrets of the land. Even the stray cats, each with a coat of midnight or copper, moved like they knew the deeper stories of the stars, their eyes reflecting ancient truths in tiny, unblinking pools. And so, the kingdom's morning unfolded slowly, a delicate waltz of soft colors, gentle sounds, and whispers of things unseen. No one rushed, no one panicked. The fallen stars were neither missed nor mourned. They simply became part of the kingdom's soft, enduring heartbeat, like a note in a lullaby that never truly ends. By mid-morning, the kingdom had fully embraced its slow rhythm. Even the river, which usually gushed with some urgency, seemed content to meander lazily, reflecting the gold and amber hues of the autumn trees. Ducks drifted on its surface, as if participating in a very polite parade, quacking softly to one another about secrets only they understood. At the edge of the town square, a small market began to awaken. Vendors set up their stalls with deliberate care, each movement careful, almost ceremonial, as if the very act of arranging their fruits, spices, and fabrics was a kind of meditation. The apples glowed with a soft red brilliance, pears whispered with gentle green hues, and every loaf of bread seemed to carry the warmth of the baker's steady, comforting hum. One could almost imagine the market as a living painting, where each color and scent moved in harmony with the others. In a quiet alley, a young storyteller set up a small bench, spreading a tapestry of deep blue and gold. Children, bundled in cozy scarves and tiny boots, crept forward, eager to listen. The storyteller began to murmur tales of the fallen stars, not in a grand, heroic manner, but in a soothing cadence, a voice that wound around the listeners like smoke from a gentle hearth fire. Some say the stars fall to remind us, the storyteller said softly, that even the heavens make mistakes, and that's perfectly fine. Meanwhile, in the higher towers of the castle, the queen walked through her gardens, gathering herbs and fragrant autumn leaves. She moved with calm precision, collecting lavender, sage, and tiny crimson berries that glimmered faintly as if touched by some lingering starlight. She hummed a tune known only to her, one that seemed to make the flowers lean just a little closer, as if in admiration. It was said that she could hear the whispers of magic carried in the wind, an ability that, of course, made her very mysterious and slightly intimidating to the townsfolk. Across the kingdom, in a secluded library, the apprentice pored over dusty tomes. Each page he turned revealed not only stories of history and kings, but also soft, subtle threads of romance, tales of quiet love that bloomed in candlelit corners, of handwritten letters that travelled by moonlight, and of connections that endured not through grand gestures, but gentle consistency. He sighed often, not out of sadness, but from the relaxing weight of all this accumulated calm knowledge, the kind that seemed to sink into the bones and slow the heartbeat just enough to encourage sleep. Even the castle guards moved in a slower cadence that day. Armor clinked softly and swords rested on shoulders without urgency. When they nodded to passers-by, it was not the formal, rigid nod of soldiers on high alert, but a careful, deliberate acknowledgement of shared humanity. The fallen stars and the magic they brought seemed to have softened even the most disciplined of warriors. By late afternoon, the kingdom glowed under the mellow sun, which filtered through leaves turning gold, orange, and ruby. Shadows stretched like lazy cats across cobblestones. Lovers strolled, hands entwined, speaking in whispers that blended seamlessly into the ambient murmur of the town. Children skipped along the edges of the river, their laughter a soft punctuation in the ongoing lullaby of the day. And through it all, the memory of the stars that had fallen the night before remained. Not as an urgent event to be solved or celebrated, but as a gentle reminder that magic existed everywhere. In the turning of a leaf, the soft hum of a baker, the delicate tilt of a cup of tea. The kingdom had learned in its own quiet way that wonder did not always announce itself with thunder. Sometimes it simply breathed, softly, into the spaces between moments, waiting to be noticed by those patient enough to see it. As evening approached, a gentle chill settled over the kingdom. The sun had dipped low, casting elongated shadows that danced slowly across rooftops and streets. Smoke spiraled lazily from chimneys, carrying with it the comforting scent of evening meals, stews simmering with root vegetables, bread just pulled from the oven, and a hint of sweet spices that made even the most hurried passerby slow their steps. In the town square, lanterns flickered to life, their warm glow reflecting off cobblestones slick from a light autumn drizzle. The light was soft, almost hesitant, as if careful not to disturb the calm that had taken hold. Street performers, who had been practicing by day, now moved in slow, deliberate patterns, playing lullaby-like tunes on flutes and violins, the melodies intertwining with the gentle patter of rain on leaves and rooftops. In a quiet corner near the river, An old watchmaker sat at his bench, polishing tiny cogs and springs. His hands moved with a patience that only decades of practice could bring, adjusting each mechanism not for efficiency, but for a peculiar sort of harmony. He hummed a soft tune, one that seemed to make the clocks themselves sigh contentedly. It was said that if you listened closely, you could hear the tick of his creations echo the heartbeat of the kingdom itself. Meanwhile, the queen, still wandering her garden, had lit small candles among the autumn leaves. Their glow cast golden patterns on the ground, flickering against the hedges and flower beds. She whispered to the plants, telling them of the stars that had fallen, of the magic woven into their petals, and of the gentle romances quietly blooming across her realm. The flowers leaned closer, and for a fleeting moment, it seemed as if the magic itself had paused to listen. The apprentice, tucked away in the library, continued to trace his fingers along the edges of old manuscripts. He discovered letters written between forgotten lovers, their words folded carefully, pressed into books as if hoping the paper itself would remember their devotion. Every now and then, he would pause, closing his eyes to imagine the autumn air and the soft glow of lanterns where these stories might have unfolded, feeling the slow, calming pull of history's quieter moments. Above the kingdom, the stars began to emerge, one by one, each twinkling softly, not demanding attention, but quietly offering comfort. Some of the townsfolk would look up and smile, sensing that the fallen stars had left traces of themselves in the sky, a faint shimmer that reminded them of the magic quietly threading through their daily lives. Lovers, hand in hand, would pause in the street to watch, sharing whispers that seemed almost reverent. And so, the night deepened. The river reflected the starlight, broken only by the occasional ripple of a fish or the soft paddling of a duck. The kingdoms seemed to exhale, sinking into a collective calm. Even the wind moved with restraint, rustling leaves and carrying the faint scent of herbs from gardens without ever disturbing the peace. Every life, from the lowliest child to the queen herself, was wrapped in a quiet rhythm. Hearts slowed, breaths deepened, and the stories, both magical and mundane, settled into the minds of those who would listen, lulling them gently toward sleep. For in this kingdom, where stars once fell, it was not grand battles or loud triumphs that mattered, but the soft, persistent magic woven into everyday existence. By the time midnight arrived, the kingdom was a portrait of calm. Windows glowed faintly, chimneys released thin trails of smoke, and the streets were nearly empty. Only the river and the whispering wind carried reminders of life, echoing stories that were gentle enough to carry one into dreams. And above it all, the stars shimmered quietly, a gentle chorus of light for anyone patient enough to notice. The final night of the kingdom, where stars fall down. The final night in the kingdom arrived quietly, like a soft exhale that stretched across valleys and villages alike. Lanterns, now dimmed to their gentlest glow, flickered in rhythm with the soft wind weaving through streets and alleys. The scent of autumn, damp leaves, baked apples, and distant fires lingered in the air, mixing with the faint hum of a lullaby sung somewhere far above in the branches of the trees that lined the kingdom's outer parts. In the castle, the queen gazed from her window at the horizon. The stars, countless and calm, seemed closer tonight. Each one shimmered as if aware that the kingdom had listened to its story, that magic had woven itself into every quiet moment of the past days. She held a single candle, letting its flame dance with the shadows, and for a moment it almost looked as if the flicker was in dialogue with the stars themselves. Down by the river, the watchmaker closed his shop. His clocks ticked softly, almost as if whispering goodnight. He placed the smallest, most delicate clock into the windowsill, its polished brass reflecting the starlight. A faint smile curved across his face, for he knew that in the morning someone would see it and feel a subtle calm, a gentle nudge toward wonder and rest. Across the kingdom, stories continued quietly, unrecorded but remembered. The apprentice closed the final manuscript he had been studying, pressing his hand to the cover and imagining the lives woven into every letter, every line. Lovers returned home, their hands intertwined, feeling the slow pull of the night lull them toward sleep. Children, tucked into warm blankets, listened to the last whispers of the wind through the trees, as if nature itself had become a storyteller. And the stars, those silent guardians of the sky, seemed to pulse gently above. Their light was not harsh or demanding, but a soft reminder. Magic existed in the small things, in quiet actions, in moments of reflection and wonder. Every street, every home, every garden in the kingdom carried a fragment of that magic. It was subtle, pervasive, and infinitely patient. The kingdom exhaled as one. Doors closed without haste, chimneys smoked without urgency, and the river's gentle current sang a lullaby that carried from the mountains to the valleys. The night deepened, enveloping all in a soft cocoon of tranquility. Even the smallest creatures, the foxes, the owls, and the fireflies, moved in harmony with the rhythm of sleep that now embraced the land. And in this perfect calm, the people dreamed. They dreamed of falling stars that whispered secrets, of clocks that counted not hours, but moments of wonder, of quiet love that needed no words, and of a kingdom where magic and autumnal charm could soften even the hardest of days. The kingdom slept, and the stars kept watch, patient and gentle. So, dear listener, as you rest your head tonight, imagine yourself wandering these quiet streets, listening to the soft sigh of the river, feeling the warmth of lanterns flickering in autumn's embrace, and perhaps catching a glimpse of a star falling softly into your own dreams. Let the magic of the kingdom lull you into calm, for tomorrow is another day, but tonight is entirely yours to rest. Thank you for joining me. I am Alan, your host at DozeTales, where stories are whispered just for sleep. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this gentle journey with anyone who needs a quiet escape tonight. Good night, and may your dreams be soft, warm, and star-filled.